There is something suspicious happening next door. Karen Whitmore pressed the phone tighter against her ear as she stood behind the half-closed blinds of her kitchen window, her eyes fixed on the backyard across the fence. The late afternoon sun poured golden light over the quiet suburban neighborhood, turning manicured lawns into sheets of green and making the white fences glow softly in the warmth. Everything should have looked peaceful. Everything should have looked ordinary. Yet Karen's expression remained tense as she continued watching the gathering next door. The voice on the emergency line asked a calm question, but Karen barely seemed to hear it. Her attention stayed locked on the backyard behind the large brick house belonging to Marcus Bennett. Smoke drifted lazily from a barbecue grill. Children chased one another across the grass. Laughter rose and fell with the breeze. Folding tables covered with food lined the patio. To anyone else, it looked like a family celebration. To Karen, it looked like something she could not quite explain. She narrowed her eyes and adjusted the blinds again. This was the third time she had checked the backyard in less than 20 minutes. The scent of grilled burgers and smoked ribs floated through the open kitchen window. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes sang softly beneath the rustling leaves of old oak trees. The neighborhood was known for its quiet streets, trimmed hedges, and predictable routines. Karen liked predictable routines. She liked knowing who belonged where. She liked order. Across the fence, Marcus stood beside the grill wearing jeans, a navy polo shirt, and an apron that one of his nieces had apparently decorated with colorful paint years earlier. He smiled as he flipped burgers while several relatives gathered around him. His mother sat comfortably beneath a patio umbrella. Two young boys played catch near the edge of the yard. A teenage girl carried trays of lemonade to a table covered with desserts. It was the kind of scene that belonged in a family photo album. Yet Karen continued watching with growing suspicion. She noticed every arriving vehicle, every unfamiliar face, every burst of laughter, every movement. None of it seemed unusual, yet something about the gathering bothered her. The emergency dispatcher asked another question. Karen lowered her voice. There are a lot of people. They have been out there for hours. Her words sounded more certain than her thoughts. Deep down, she could not point to a single actual problem. She simply felt uncomfortable. Across the yard, Marcus handed a plate of food to an elderly neighbor who had wandered over carrying a folding chair. The old man laughed at something Marcus said. A moment later, several children surrounded the chair, asking questions and smiling. The scene radiated warmth, community, family. But Karen only watched more closely. The sunlight reflected off her kitchen counter, filling the room with bright amber light. She could hear the faint sounds of music drifting over the fence. Nothing was loud. Nothing was disruptive. Yet her fingers tightened around the phone. The dispatcher politely explained that officers would stop by to check the situation. Karen thanked her and ended the call. Then she returned to the window. Outside, the evening continued peacefully. The grill smoked gently. The children laughed. The family gathered closer together. And completely unaware of the phone call that had just been made, Marcus Bennett smiled as he welcomed another relative through the backyard gate. The backyard was alive with the warmth of a family afternoon, sunlight filtering through the tall oaks surrounding the yard, casting dappled patterns across the green lawn. Marcus Bennett moved gracefully between the grill and the picnic table, placing perfectly cooked burgers onto plates with a practiced hand, his smile calm and genuine as his nieces and nephews ran in circles around him. The aroma of smoked ribs and sizzling vegetables mingled with the faint fragrance of blooming flowers in the garden, creating an atmosphere of domestic harmony that seemed to stretch time into slow, comforting moments. Children's laughter echoed across the yard as one boy tripped and was gently caught by an older cousin. The scene filled with warmth and the simple joy of family connection. The table was set with colorful platters of food, lemonade in pitchers, and a small stack of paper plates waiting for the next wave of cousins arriving from the house. Marcus paused briefly to adjust the patio umbrella, its canvas flapping softly in the afternoon breeze, then turned to help his mother, seated comfortably in a chair, with a cup of iced tea, her face lighting up with a quiet appreciation for the care he always displayed. Across the fence, Karen Whitmore's view remained fixed on the backyard. She noticed every arrival, every subtle movement, every expression on the children's faces, cataloging them in her mind as she traced their steps across the grass. The dispatcher's voice had long faded from the phone on the counter, But her attention did not waver. Every detail felt magnified, every smile or gesture potentially suspicious. The music playing softly from a small portable speaker was cheerful and light, punctuating the sounds of conversation, distant traffic, and the rhythmic clatter of a spoon against a glass as one of Marcus's nieces stirred a pitcher of lemonade. A dog barked somewhere in the yard, tails wagging as children ran past, and Marcus stooped to pet the animal, his expression gentle and attentive, reflecting an awareness of the living beings around him. Sunlight shifted slowly across the patio, highlighting the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead from standing near the grill, and casting golden highlights along the edges of his neatly trimmed hair. He spoke to his nephews about proper table manners, laughed at a joke shared by his mother, and exchanged smiles with his sisters as they brought trays of freshly cut fruit to the table. Every action was deliberate yet natural, every moment unforced, filling the space with authenticity, calm, and family cohesion. Karen's eyes, however, scanned for anomalies, her focus unrelenting, noting every step Marcus took, every laugh, every gesture, as though the perfect normalcy of the scene itself might hide some underlying secret. The wind picked up slightly, rustling leaves and fluttering napkins, and Marcus adjusted them carefully while continuing his conversation with his family, completely unaware of the scrutiny from the other side of the fence, his day uninterrupted by the distant unease brewing just yards away, the contrast between the serenity of his backyard and the tension of the observer creating a quiet but palpable dramatic tension in the neighborhood, a tension poised on the edge of revelation and misunderstanding. Karen Whitmore pressed her face closer to the window, her hands gripping the sill as her eyes followed every movement in the backyard with meticulous intensity. The children darted between tables and the grill, their laughter ringing like small bells across the lawn, oblivious to the scrutiny from beyond the fence. Marcus Bennett moved gracefully, adjusting plates, pouring lemonade, and laughing with his family, the sunlight glinting off the polished surfaces of the trays and glassware, each motion calm, deliberate, and confident. The soft scent of smoked meat mingled with fresh-cut grass and warm sunlight, creating a scene that should have reassured any observer, yet Karen's gaze remained sharp, cataloging each detail as if deciphering a hidden message within ordinary activity. She noticed the way a napkin fluttered slightly in the breeze, the tilt of a child's hat, the precise placement of a chair, mundane elements that to her suggested something amiss. Across the yard, Marcus paused to straighten a tilted umbrella while simultaneously ensuring a young niece safely carried a dessert tray, his eyes scanning the scene calmly and without tension, completely unaware of the heightened attention from the neighbor's window. The family dog wagged its tail and weaved between the children, adding motion and warmth to the tableau, and Marcus stooped to give it an affectionate scratch behind the ears. Karen's eyes followed every step, counting heads, timing movements, and noting the interactions between family members, each small gesture interpreted as a potential sign of misconduct, though nothing concrete appeared. The light shifted as the afternoon progressed, casting long shadows across the yard and highlighting the textured surfaces of brick, wood, and painted metal, emphasizing depth and realism in the scene. The distant hum of traffic on the street blended with the faint rhythm of birdsong, creating an ambient soundtrack that contrasted with Karen's internal tension. She leaned further into the window, noticing the smallest details, the pattern of sunlight on the patio stones, the careful placement of chairs around the picnic table, the subtle nod exchanged between Marcus and his mother as she offered guidance on serving food. Every aspect of the scene was mundane, orderly, and undeniably familial, yet Karen remained unconvinced, her brows furrowed as if expecting the ordinary to reveal something hidden and disruptive. Marcus handed a plate of burgers to a visiting neighbor with a warm smile, his posture relaxed and inviting, conveying reassurance and authority through kindness alone. Karen's lips pressed together tightly, her fingers tightening on the sill as she whispered under her breath, questioning, analyzing, and imagining scenarios, the tension building despite the calm and cheerful environment outside. The sun continued its slow descent, casting golden highlights and softening the edges of trees, fences, and rooftops, the yard bathed in warm light, the smell of barbecue lingering, and the family engaged fully in their gathering. Karen's thoughts raced, alternating between doubt, suspicion, and a growing sense of unease, her imagination filling gaps where no real threat existed, and all the while Marcus carried on with measured attention to detail, embodying calm, dignity, and unshakable composure, completely unaware of the neighbor's misjudgment and the quiet drama unfolding silently behind closed blinds. The afternoon drifted toward evening as the sunlight softened into a warm amber glow that settled over the neighborhood, turning rooftops golden and casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns. Marcus Bennett carried a tray of freshly grilled vegetables from the patio to the main table, smiling as one of his nephews attempted to balance 3 paper cups at once and nearly lost them to a sudden gust of wind. Laughter erupted around the yard, and Marcus shook his head with amused patience before helping the boys steady the drinks. The gathering felt effortless, the kind of family afternoon that seemed to exist outside of time. His mother sat comfortably beneath the umbrella, telling stories from decades ago, while younger relatives listened between bites of food. Nearby, cousins arranged folding chairs into a loose circle, preparing for the annual family photograph that someone insisted on taking every summer. The smell of barbecue smoke mingled with fresh-cut grass and blooming roses from a nearby flower bed, creating an atmosphere that felt peaceful and deeply familiar. Across the fence, Karen Whitmore continued her silent surveillance. Her coffee had long since gone cold on the kitchen counter, but she barely noticed. Her attention remained fixed on the activity next door. She watched Marcus greet another arriving guest with a handshake and a smile. She watched children run through the yard carrying sparklers that would be saved for later in the evening. She watched relatives unload homemade desserts from the backs of their vehicles. None of it matched the picture she had created in her mind, yet she could not let go of her growing conviction that something was wrong. The certainty no longer came from evidence, came from assumption. Every ordinary detail somehow became suspicious in her eyes. A truck parked along the curb became a concern. A group conversation became a secret meeting. The simple fact that so many people seemed happy only deepened her discomfort. Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Marcus noticed an elderly neighbor walking slowly down the sidewalk carrying several grocery bags. Without hesitation, he stepped through the gate and crossed the lawn. A few moments later, he was helping carry the bags to the woman's front porch while she thanked him repeatedly. The interaction lasted less than 5 minutes, but it left a visible smile on the woman's face. Marcus returned to the barbecue and immediately resumed helping his family, never drawing attention to the gesture. Several relatives barely even noticed he had left. To him, it was simply the natural thing to do. Karen noticed. She noticed everything. Yet even that act of kindness somehow failed to challenge the narrative she had constructed. The neighborhood remained calm. Children laughed. Music drifted softly through the air. Plates filled and emptied. Conversations rose and fell. But beneath the peaceful surface, another tension quietly continued building. Karen glanced toward the street every few moments now, waiting, expecting, anticipating the arrival of someone who would confirm her suspicions and justify the call she had already made. Meanwhile, Marcus adjusted the temperature on the grill and listened to his niece describe her plans for college, completely unaware that events had already been set in motion beyond the fence line. The golden sunlight continued to fade, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of an approaching vehicle echoed through the neighborhood. The sound grew louder by the second, subtle at first and then unmistakable, the low hum of an approaching vehicle rolling through the quiet suburban streets as the golden light of evening settled over the neighborhood. Marcus Bennett stood beside the grill, carefully turning a final batch of burgers while listening to his nephew explain the rules of a game the children had invented only minutes earlier. Around him, family members moved comfortably through familiar routines. His sisters arranged desserts on the table. His mother laughed softly at a story from decades ago. The scent of charcoal, barbecue sauce, and summer air blended together beneath the rustling oak trees. It was the kind of evening people remembered years later. Across the fence, Karen Whitmore immediately recognized the vehicle when it turned onto the street. Her pulse quickened. She stepped away from the kitchen window and moved toward her front door, unable to hide the anticipation building inside her. In her mind, validation was finally arriving. Everything she had been watching all afternoon was about to be confirmed. The patrol vehicle moved slowly down the block before pulling to the curb several houses away. The flashing lights were not activated, yet their presence alone seemed to alter the atmosphere. Karen opened her front door and stepped onto her porch, folding her arms as she watched the officers inside the vehicle survey the street. A few neighbors noticed as well. Curtains shifted. Front doors opened slightly. Curious eyes appeared. News traveled quickly in quiet neighborhoods, and the sight of a police vehicle always attracted attention. In the backyard, Marcus remained completely unaware. One of his nieces handed him a paper plate piled high with food and insisted that he finally sit down and eat. He laughed and accepted, allowing himself a rare moment to relax. The warm glow of sunset reflected across the patio table as he settled into a chair beside his mother. Children continued running across the lawn. Music drifted softly through the air. The gathering remained peaceful. Yet beyond the fence line, tension quietly continued to build. Karen watched the officers step out of their vehicle. Her expression carried certainty. She believed she already knew how the next few minutes would unfold. The officers exchanged a few words before looking toward the backyard. One of them adjusted his radio while the other glanced down at a notepad. Neither appeared rushed. Neither appeared concerned. They simply followed procedure. Even so, Karen interpreted every movement as confirmation that she had been right all along. A light breeze moved through the neighborhood, carrying the sounds of laughter and conversation from Marcus's yard toward the street. The contrast was striking. On one side of the fence stood a family celebrating together beneath the fading sunlight. On the other stood a woman waiting for her suspicions to be justified. The officers began walking toward the property. Their footsteps remained calm and measured as they approached the gate. One of Marcus's cousins noticed them first and paused mid-conversation. Another relative turned toward the street. The laughter softened. Conversations slowed. A subtle wave of confusion passed through the gathering. Marcus followed their gaze. He set his drink down carefully and rose from his chair. The sunlight caught the edge of his glasses as he looked toward the approaching officers. His expression remained calm, curious, respectful. Around him, family members exchanged uncertain glances. The evening that had felt so warm and ordinary only moments earlier suddenly seemed suspended in place. And from her porch across the street, Karen Whitmore watched everything unfold, convinced that she was about to be proven right. The police officers approached the backyard gate with measured, calm steps, their uniforms neat under the fading sunlight, the hum of their radio quietly blending with the sounds of laughter and conversation from Marcus Bennett's family gathering. Marcus remained composed, standing beside the picnic table while his mother adjusted the plates of food and the children ran freely, oblivious to the approaching authority. A subtle breeze carried the aroma of grilled vegetables, smoked meats, and the warm summer air across the yard, intertwining with the faint scent of flowers from the garden beds. Marcus's nieces and nephews paused mid-laughter as the officers reached the gate, and he raised a hand in greeting, his expression calm, welcoming, and confident, radiating a sense of order and dignity that contrasted with the tension outside the fence. Karen Whitmore watched from her porch, her posture rigid with anticipation, convinced that the next moments would validate her concerns, her eyes following each officer's movement with a critical focus, noting how they positioned themselves and exchanged glances before approaching. Marcus gestured toward a vacant chair, inviting one of the officers to step onto the patio for a moment while keeping his voice low and polite, a simple act of courtesy that immediately softened the air without breaking the rhythm of the family gathering. The children glanced curiously at the adults, sensing the subtle shift in attention, but returned quickly to their game, giggling and running in circles around the yard. One of the officers lowered his gaze briefly toward Marcus and then back toward the street, his posture still professional, yet a flicker of recognition crossed his face, unspoken but significant, as if an invisible thread of awareness passed between him and Marcus. Marcus continued his motions, adjusting plates, responding to questions, and laughing lightly at his mother's teasing remarks, his presence steady and reassuring. The warm glow of the sun slanted across the lawn, catching the edges of the umbrellas and casting a soft, golden light over the scene, highlighting the calm order of the backyard against the tense expectation just outside the fence. Karen's grip on her coffee mug tightened unconsciously as she traced every movement of the officers, each step reinforcing the narrative she had built in her mind, while the family, entirely absorbed in one another, remained unaware of the scrutiny and the subtle shift in dynamics. The dog barked once, happily weaving between children, and Marcus stooped to scratch its ears, maintaining a composed, gentle demeanor. The officers paused for a moment, taking in the scene of domestic warmth, casual conversation, and simple joy, and the faintest acknowledgment passed between them, a silent recognition of the order, dignity, and calm Marcus maintained even under observation. The afternoon light continued to mellow, casting shadows along the fence line, blurring the boundary between the family's peaceful world and the tension of expectation across the street, creating a cinematic, emotionally charged moment where calm character met cautious authority, and anticipation hung in the air like the lingering scent of barbecue. Karen Whitmore stepped a little closer to the curb, her heart quickening as she watched the officers pause near the gate, trying to gauge the situation while Marcus Bennett remained calm in the midst of the backyard activity. The children were momentarily distracted by the sudden movement at the perimeter, their laughter softening as they glanced toward the approaching figures, yet Marcus's steady presence reassured them, and they quickly resumed their games with small giggles. Sunlight faded gently into a warm, amber hue, highlighting the rich green of the lawn, the subtle browns of the wooden fence, and the soft pastels of the family's clothing, creating a visual warmth that contrasted sharply with the tension lingering just beyond the fence. Marcus held a plate of food, offered it to a niece, and watched her eyes light up as she accepted, his demeanor patient, attentive, and calm. One of the officers made a subtle gesture, speaking into a radio, but his expression softened as he observed Marcus's composed posture, the natural authority in his body language, and the effortless dignity with which he managed the gathering. Karen's gaze remained sharp, scanning every detail, the way Marcus's shoulders relaxed, the tilt of his head as he interacted with his mother, the small, careful movements he made when adjusting a chair or handing a drink. Across the yard, the dog ran happily between the children, tail wagging, adding a playful energy that contrasted with Karen's watchful stillness. A breeze stirred the trees, rustling leaves above and carrying the faint aroma of barbecue and flowers toward the street. Marcus's sisters moved efficiently, arranging platters of food and keeping an eye on the youngest children, their laughter mingling with the music softly playing from a portable speaker. Karen adjusted her posture on the porch, gripping the railing tightly, eyes flicking between Marcus and the officers, expecting some sign that would validate her assumptions, yet finding none. Marcus continued his gentle interactions, offering a plate to a neighbor who had wandered into the yard, nodding politely and smiling without fanfare. The subtle harmony of the scene, the order, the quiet joy, and the unspoken understanding between family members, was in stark contrast to Karen's inner anticipation. The officers approached the gate carefully, one glancing briefly at the family before stepping aside to communicate quietly with a colleague. Marcus acknowledged them with a courteous nod, his calm presence a steadying force that seemed to diffuse the invisible tension radiating from the street. Shadows lengthened across the yard as the sun moved lower, bathing the scene in a golden glow, reflecting off glassware, tray edges, and the folds of clothing, each detail sharp and vivid, reinforcing the cinematic quality of the moment. The children's games resumed fully, laughter rising again, while Karen held her breath, waiting for a revelation, for something to shift the balance she believed existed between her perception and the peaceful reality unfolding just beyond the fence, a reality that remained steady, warm, and unwavering under Marcus Bennett's watchful, dignified presence. The evening sun settled lower behind the rooftops, bathing the neighborhood in a rich golden glow that softened every edge and painted the backyard in warm amber light. Marcus Bennett stood near the patio table, listening attentively as one of his nephews described a science project, while family members passed plates of food and refilled glasses of lemonade. The atmosphere remained welcoming and relaxed, yet a subtle shift had begun to ripple through the gathering. The presence of the officers at the gate had become impossible to ignore. Conversations continued, but voices lowered slightly. Curious glances drifted toward the entrance. Children occasionally paused their games to look toward the adults before returning to their laughter. Marcus noticed the uncertainty in a few faces and responded the only way he knew how. He remained calm. He smiled. He encouraged everyone to continue enjoying the evening. The confidence in his voice reassured those around him. Across the yard, one of the officers continued observing the gathering while quietly speaking with his partner. There was no urgency in their posture. No alarm, only procedure. Yet something about Marcus continued to hold their attention. The younger officer studied him carefully. His face seemed familiar. Not from the neighborhood. Not from a previous call. Somewhere else. Somewhere important. The feeling lingered just beyond reach. The officer glanced again as Marcus helped his elderly mother stand from her chair before walking her carefully toward the patio steps. The gesture was simple, but it revealed something about the man. Respect, patience, character. The officer felt the faint spark of recognition grow stronger. Nearby, Karen Whitmore remained fixed on her porch. The confidence she had felt earlier was beginning to fade around the edges. She had expected concern. She had expected questions. Instead, the officers appeared increasingly relaxed as they observed the gathering. She watched Marcus interact with relatives, neighbors, and children. Every interaction seemed effortless, genuine. The more she looked, the harder it became to find anything suspicious. Yet she could not bring herself to abandon the assumption she had carried all afternoon. The music continued softly beneath the sounds of conversation. Fireflies began appearing near the hedges as daylight slowly retreated. The smell of barbecue still lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of summer grass and blooming flowers. Marcus stepped toward the gate at last and greeted the officers directly. His posture remained open and courteous. One officer explained that a call had been made regarding concerns about the gathering. Marcus listened carefully without interruption. Then he nodded politely. His response was measured and respectful. He answered every question calmly and even apologized if the gathering had accidentally inconvenienced anyone nearby. The officers exchanged a quick glance. The younger officer felt the recognition strike harder now. He knew that voice. He had heard it before. Not in person. Somewhere official. Somewhere professional. The thought refused to leave him. As Marcus spoke with quiet confidence, the officer searched his memory. Across the street, Karen watched anxiously. Family members observed from a distance. The golden light continued fading into twilight. And standing beneath the soft glow of the backyard string lights that had just flickered on, Marcus Bennett remained completely composed, unaware that the truth about his identity was only moments away from changing everything. The golden hour deepened into early twilight, and the soft string lights Marcus Bennett had draped around the patio flickered gently on, casting warm pools of illumination across the lawn, highlighting the subtle movements of the children as they continued their games. Laughter rose in measured waves, mingling with the faint hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of the family dog chasing a stray ball across the grass. Marcus moved through the scene with quiet assurance, offering plates to nieces and nephews, adjusting chairs and speaking softly with his mother, each gesture calm and deliberate, grounding the family in a sense of normalcy. The officers at the gate now advanced closer, their steps deliberate, their eyes scanning but increasingly attentive to Marcus's composed demeanor. One young officer hesitated, a flicker of recognition crossing his face as he observed the man's posture, the careful precision in his movements, the understated authority emanating from his presence. Karen Whitmore, standing tensely on her porch across the street, held her breath, convinced that her assumptions were about to be validated, yet noticing the measured ease with which Marcus handled every interaction heightened her confusion and quietly unsettled her certainty. Marcus paused to help a cousin carry a tray of food to the table, smiling warmly, his tone gentle, and his body language open, entirely unaffected by the peripheral scrutiny. The officers exchanged a subtle glance between themselves, one whispering quietly into a radio as recognition sharpened, while the other observed Marcus's interactions with neighbors, children, and family members, noting his patience, attentiveness, and calm command of the environment. Across the yard, sunlight now slanted low and orange across the patio furniture and the tips of the garden flowers, accentuating textures and casting long shadows that flickered with the soft movements of children running and playing. Marcus offered a small nod to an elderly neighbor, inviting her to join the family circle, and she accepted with a shy smile, clearly comforted by his composure and the welcoming atmosphere he cultivated. Karen's fingers gripped the railing of her porch as she strained to reconcile the warmth, order, and dignity before her with the suspicion she had held for hours, each moment of observed grace challenging her assumptions and intensifying the silent tension between expectation and reality. The dog barked once, weaving between legs and small chairs, and Marcus stooped to pat its head with a reassuring hand, maintaining a rhythm of kindness and attentiveness that permeated the space. Music continued softly in the background, laughter ebbed and flowed, and the soft clatter of cups and plates punctuated the gathering. The officers approached the gate, stopping just short, exchanging quiet words, their demeanor professional yet increasingly aware of something remarkable in Marcus's conduct. Light from the fading sunset bounced off glassware, tableware, and the slight sheen of perspiration on Marcus's forehead, each detail sharp and vivid in the warm evening light. Karen's eyes followed every subtle movement, her expectations meeting a reality that was serene, controlled, and unexpectedly authoritative, a calm dignity in Marcus Bennett that began to hint at the revelation that would soon redefine every assumption she had held about him, leaving the neighborhood suspended in a quiet, cinematic anticipation. The soft glow of twilight deepened, painting the backyard in shades of gold and amber, and the string lights Marcus Bennett had arranged above the patio glimmered like fireflies, illuminating the carefully set table and casting gentle highlights across the plates of food and laughing faces of children and family members alike. Marcus remained calm and present, moving between the grill and the table with deliberate grace, offering slices of watermelon to the youngest children and gently adjusting a chair for his elderly mother who smiled warmly at his attention. The officers had now advanced to the gate and stood with their hands folded, exchanging brief, low murmurs, their posture professional yet tinged with curiosity as they studied Marcus's composed demeanor and the serene rhythm of the gathering. Karen Whitmore, standing tensely on her porch across the street, pressed her hands against the railing and leaned forward, expecting confrontation or at least evidence to confirm her assumptions, yet noticing how effortlessly Marcus managed each interaction, the ease in his gestures, and the quiet authority he exuded without raising his voice, began to stir a subtle, uneasy shift in her certainty. One officer's gaze lingered longer than necessary, recognition flickering briefly in his expression as he pieced together the familiarity of Marcus's presence, the cadence of his speech, and the natural command embedded in his gentle guidance of the family's movements. Children ran back and forth between games and the table, their giggles punctuating the evening air as Marcus smiled at a joke one of his nieces made, the warmth in his eyes reflecting genuine amusement and attentiveness. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers, charcoal, and barbecue, mingling with the distant hum of the neighborhood settling into evening. Marcus adjusted the placement of a plate and nodded to his sister, signaling it was time to serve another round of food, each movement calm, deliberate, and imbued with a quiet confidence. Karen's eyes darted between the approaching officers and Marcus, trying to reconcile the peaceful domestic scene with the narrative she had constructed, yet every act of courtesy, every gentle smile, every measured word from Marcus slowly chipped away at the certainty she had held. The officers moved closer, one finally stepping slightly past the gate to speak directly with Marcus, whose posture remained open and courteous, offering clear answers and respectful gestures. The air seemed to pause as subtle tension hung between expectation and reality. Marcus's children continued to play, his mother watched with soft laughter, and the scent of food lingered as if holding the space together. The younger officer's eyes widened slightly, the moment of recognition solidifying as he realized the importance of the man before him, connecting details he could not yet voice. Across the street, Karen's breathing slowed as a new awareness crept in, the disparity between her assumptions and the observable truth settling uncomfortably, and Marcus, completely composed, remained the anchor of calm, dignity, and human grace in a backyard illuminated by the soft glow of evening light and the quiet music of family life, poised on the edge of revelation that was about to shift everything. The evening seemed to pause for a moment as the younger officer looked more closely at Marcus Bennett, his expression shifting from routine professionalism to unmistakable recognition. The realization arrived slowly at first and then all at once. He had seen that face before, not at a neighborhood gathering, not in a community meeting, but in official photographs, legal briefings, and courthouse materials reviewed during training. His eyes widened slightly before he straightened his posture. Beside him, his partner noticed the change immediately. A quiet exchange passed between them, barely more than a few words, yet the atmosphere around the gate transformed. Marcus remained calm, unaware of the impact the recognition was creating. He simply listened politely as the officers explained that a concern had been reported regarding the gathering. The string lights above the patio glowed warmly against the deepening blue sky, illuminating the faces of family members who watched from a respectful distance. Children continued playing, though more slowly now, sensing the attention focused near the gate. Marcus nodded as the officers finished speaking. "I understand," he said with the same measured courtesy he had shown throughout the evening. "If there is anything you need to check, please feel free." The younger officer glanced at his partner before speaking. His voice carried a note of respect that had not been present moments earlier. "Sir, forgive me for asking, but are you Judge Marcus Bennett?" The question seemed to float through the evening air. Conversations around the patio faded. Several relatives exchanged surprised smiles. Marcus looked briefly amused. "Yes," he replied. "I am." Silence followed. Not dramatic silence. The kind that appears when reality suddenly rearranges itself. The officers immediately adjusted their posture. Their expressions remained professional, but the uncertainty was gone. Across the street, Karen Whitmore felt her stomach tighten. The words echoed in her mind. Judge Marcus Bennett. For a moment she wondered if she had heard incorrectly. The younger officer continued respectfully, explaining that he recognized Marcus from federal court proceedings and official judicial events. Marcus responded with characteristic humility, dismissing the attention with a small smile and a polite nod. To him, the title had never been the most important thing about who he was. Around the yard, family members relaxed. Laughter slowly returned. Someone carried another tray of food to the table. A child asked if dessert was finally ready. The ordinary rhythm of the gathering resumed. Yet across the street nothing felt ordinary anymore. Karen stood frozen on her porch. The assumption she had built throughout the afternoon suddenly seemed fragile and exposed. She replayed every moment in her mind. The children playing on the lawn. The elderly mother sitting beneath the umbrella. The neighbors welcomed with kindness. The groceries Marcus had helped carry. The laughter. The hospitality. None of it had matched the story she had invented. The officers completed their brief conversation and thanked Marcus for his cooperation. One even complimented the atmosphere of the gathering before stepping back toward the gate. Marcus responded graciously, wishing them a safe evening. The interaction lasted only a few minutes, yet its impact stretched far beyond the fence line. Under the glow of the patio lights, surrounded by family, Marcus Bennett had never raised his voice, never demanded respect, and never used his position to influence the situation. He had simply remained himself, and somehow that quiet dignity carried more power than any title ever could. The backyard settled into a gentle calm as evening deepened, the last traces of sunlight slipping behind the rooftops and leaving the yard bathed in the soft glow of string lights, their warm illumination reflecting off plates, glasses, and the faces of family members gathered around the patio. Marcus Bennett moved deliberately among his family, smiling gently as he handed slices of pie to children, adjusted chairs for elders, and nodded attentively to his mother as she shared a light-hearted story from decades past. The officers at the gate remained at a respectful distance, observing quietly, their expressions a mix of professional courtesy and cautious recognition. The younger officer now fully aware of Marcus's federal role yet deferring entirely to his composure and the natural authority he exuded without a word of command. Across the street, Karen Whitmore remained frozen on her porch, her eyes wide as the realization settled in, the assumption she had carried all afternoon now crumbling as she reconciled the warmth, order, and genuine kindness of the gathering with her own prior expectations. Marcus paused for a moment to offer assistance to a niece balancing a tray of food, his hands steady and movements calm, embodying patience and attentiveness that extended seamlessly to everyone in his presence, including the officers, who now approached with subdued acknowledgment rather than suspicion. The children ran across the lawn in small, joyful arcs, their laughter ringing in the evening air, and Marcus chuckled softly at their games, bending occasionally to adjust a fallen ball or encourage a shy smile. The scent of barbecue lingered, mingling with summer grass and garden flowers, a sensory thread binding the family together even as external tension quietly dissolved. One officer finally spoke, his tone respectful, acknowledging Marcus's presence and role without unnecessary formality, while Marcus nodded with humility, the simplicity of his response underscoring a dignity far greater than any title could convey. Karen's eyes followed every subtle motion, the tilt of Marcus's head, the careful gestures toward children, the warmth in his smile, the ease with which he engaged with every family member and neighbor, and slowly, a sense of awe replaced her prior certainty, the recognition that she had misjudged the situation settling uncomfortably within her. Music from a small speaker played softly in the background. The gentle hum of conversation blended with the sounds of evening insects and a distant dog barking, creating a soundscape both ordinary and harmonious, contrasting with the inner turbulence of those observing from beyond the fence. Marcus guided a neighbor to a chair, offered polite conversation, and returned to his family without drawing attention, his demeanor consistent, composed, and quietly commanding. Shadows stretched across the lawn as twilight deepened, the string lights casting warm highlights across the scene, emphasizing textures of grass, wood, and fabric, and enhancing the sense of intimacy and safety. Every detail, from the careful placement of food to the laughter shared between cousins, reinforced a tableau of ordinary humanity, kindness, and dignity, standing in stark contrast to the tension that had existed only minutes before. Across the street, Karen exhaled, slowly processing the revelation, the quiet lesson of the evening crystallizing as she realized the depth of Marcus Bennett's character and the simple power of calm, patient, and genuine human presence. The officers completed their brief exchange, nodded respectfully, and withdrew slightly, leaving the family to continue their evening undisturbed, the golden glow of lights and laughter persisting, a gentle affirmation of character, humanity, and the unspoken influence of quiet dignity. As twilight deepened into full evening, the backyard remained warm with the gentle glow of string lights, casting soft pools of light over Marcus Bennett and his family gathered around the patio. The children had returned fully to their games, giggling and running across the grass while Marcus moved gracefully among them, offering encouragement, adjusting chairs, and listening attentively to his mother and nieces, his calm demeanor holding the space steady and serene. The officers who had approached the gate earlier now stood back, giving space and observing with professional respect, their earlier scrutiny replaced by quiet acknowledgment of the dignity and composure Marcus exuded. Karen Whitmore, still on her porch across the street, felt the lingering weight of realization settle heavily. The assumption she had carried all afternoon had dissolved in the light of the truth, leaving her with an uneasy admiration for the man she had misjudged. Marcus paused beside the table to help his mother refill glasses, smiling gently as he did so, and glanced at the children laughing together, the warmth in his eyes reflecting care, patience, and a deep sense of responsibility. The subtle hum of conversation, occasional clinks of plates and cups, and soft laughter created a rhythm that contrasted with the tension across the street, yet the scene felt entirely ordinary within the yard. One of the officers stepped slightly forward, exchanging a quiet word with his partner before nodding to Marcus, who responded with a calm, courteous gesture, embodying quiet authority without a raised voice or overt display. Karen's gaze lingered on the subtle interactions, the way Marcus guided a child back to the table, how he handed a plate to a neighbor with polite encouragement, and how every movement seemed measured, composed, and gentle, and she slowly realized the depth of character she had overlooked. The scent of summer air mingled with barbecue smoke and blooming flowers, carrying through the neighborhood and connecting the moments into a cohesive tapestry of human warmth. Music from a small speaker drifted lightly across the yard, and a dog barked once in playful rhythm with the children's laughter. Marcus adjusted a chair for his cousin, offered a few words of reassurance, and returned to his mother with a small smile, never drawing attention to himself, yet commanding the respect and attention naturally through the quiet strength of his actions. Shadows stretched long across the lawn, accentuating textures of grass, wood, and fabric in the soft evening light, creating a cinematic tableau that emphasized the contrast between the peaceful, ordered family gathering and the prior tension that had hovered outside the fence. Karen exhaled slowly, the lesson of patience, humility, and dignity crystallizing within her as she reflected on the evening's events, a revelation of quiet power in ordinary kindness. Marcus continued to guide the gathering with gentle attentiveness, sharing small gestures of help and care, embodying the principle that true authority comes not from titles or status, but from empathy, calmness, and human decency. The officers departed quietly, leaving the yard to its warmth and laughter, while the golden string lights glimmered overhead, framing Marcus Bennett at the center of a peaceful, connected, and harmonious family moment, a living testament to the strength of quiet human dignity and the enduring power of patience, kindness, and character.